Well, good evening and welcome to Studio 13. This is Tom Brennan. Tonight it's my pleasure to bring to you the world's only artist, Bob Dobbs. I think the most impressive achievement of Bob in the last few years has been to subtly show us all that the mind and thinking can be fun. In Western society, we are given probably two thoughts, both of them worries, one to do with death, one to do with money, where is it coming from? We're taught that we can have fun getting on computers and doing nice little graphics or going to play racquetball or kickboxing. Bob shows you that you can use your mind as your own computer base for fun. You can think and rethink and synthesize everything you are being bombarded with into your own recreation. In following with Joyce's axiom that Bob quoted on one of his CDs, all our past times become pastimes. Recreational thinking can be fun. Pleasure to have you on, Bob. Thanks for being here, and you're looking great.
Great intro. I mean, that's, no one said it that way before. I give you kudos for that. That's original, that's accurate. One of the best summations I've ever heard of what I'm about.
That's great, thank you. The first question I wanted to go into is, I know you're very conversant with Norman Mailer's work. A thought that occurred to me while listening to your tape, and Bob has two CDs out, both are excellent, Bob's Media Ecology and Bob's Media Ecology Squared. I think Mailer's career, you state in 1945, time ended, linear time, with the explosion of the atomic bomb. Mailer had a pop novel, a very pop novel, The Naked and the Dead.
In 48.
#1 bestseller in 48. And then immediately, in his career arc, he goes in the exact opposite direction. He used the success from that to write a virtually unreadable, dense, polemical novel, Barbary Shore, about Trotskyists versus Stalinists, which nobody wanted to read, least of all himself. I think that career arc, though, that tension, setting up a tension with the pop work and then what your next work will be, is something that's become ingrained in artists, even very thoughtless, very artists that generally don't think that much have used that as a career course. You know, you have Dylan going from discovering Rimbaud can mix with Chuck Berry and then turning around and doing the Jesus thing. So it's been something that American artists have followed really well. How does that fit into the Bobscape?
Where are the charts?
Where are the charts?
Are they hidden in here somewhere? Where are the charts?
I do have one in the folder over there.
All right.
I do have one in some folders.
Yeah, what's very important is I have, you asked me what it's got to do. The charts express this thing, and it's very important. It's a dialectic between Norman Mailer and Marshall McLuhan. Is that Mailer, his whole dilemma was to act out the problem you just expressed for the role of the traditional artist or writer in a world where culture becomes our business.
Mm-hmm.
And so he acted out the effects and therefore was very violent because he didn't have the technique of the suspended judgment. Marshall had the technique of suspended judgment, and he explained the causes of the dilemma for Norman Mailer. And there's a documentary on Marshall made by his daughter Stephanie about 1984 where they have Trudeau, several news people, and they have Norman on. And Norman says that up to the point he met Marshall, he thought he had the fastest brain in the West, that he was the smartest person. But when he met Marshall, he said, no, this guy goes a lot faster than me. That's the point. You've got to be fast to understand the electric environment, to then perceive what Finnegan's Wake is doing. And no novelist in our time has ever expressed a new form of novel that included Finnegan's Wake, because Finnegan's Wake killed the novel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Ulysses did, Finnegan's Wake then solved the problem of what a book would do after the death of the novel. Now, Marshall knew that, and therefore he wrote the greatest science fiction novel of our time.
Which is?
All his works are science fiction novel, but this is spelled in, if you read his letters, it's about page 217, a letter he wrote to his mother, and he said, I've discovered a new form of science fiction novel. And I'm not out to prove anything, but to show the community in action. He says, it is a new kind of novel. So Marshall McLuhan, unbeknownst to Reverend Stang and the rest of the gang here living in America, don't know that Marshall was a novelist, and he outdid Norman Mailer. And he did not have that dilemma, even though Marshall was involved in a subtle way with the assassination of President Kennedy. If you read his foreword to The Interior Landscape, he says, "Must we continue to mow down the Kennedys?" Blah, 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 blah. You know, we, he includes himself. Norman Mailer never thought that he was responsible for killing Kennedy. And therefore
he did express guilt in Miami and the Siege of Chicago about the Robert Kennedy assassination.
He did not know why.
He says, "I had fornicated with a witch the night of the deed."
Yeah, very good, because he didn't...
he thought that was a causal factor, that his lack of faith in his own marriage contributed subtly to the negativism of the Year of the Monkey, '68.
Very good.
Robert's demise.
That's the, you know, but he's acting...
But he was using that as a novelist, an American actor,
he's
almost,
still...
method actor kind of interpretation, don't you think?
Yeah, William Irwin Thompson, in simple terms, expresses Norman's problem. He was still acting out the Western Prometheus ego. And he didn't know how to create an ego without it, to quote Beefheart, without it flying, right? And Marshall knew how to create an ego without it flying in your face. And maybe that is the difference between Canada and America. You know, that could be the dilemma and the dialectic acted out by Marshall and Norman Mailer.
Very interesting. So in a sense, Marshall's work itself was the hero.
Yes.
The fictive that he created was the hero, whereas Mailer always wanted to inject himself as the persona that was undergoing these...
he was the user
based
of
on classical, like James Fenimore Cooper,
yes,
Mark Twain. You know, you always have to be the American protagonist on the road, so your ego is confronting everything and chopping it down.
Yes, the Canadian never...
Whereas Marshall was at a remove.
He never had a national identity, so he could put it on.
And more playful.
Yes.
The playfulness is
because
one of the
we never
keys.
had a national identity. I was born in Paris in 1922. I wasn't a Canadian. I wasn't born in Canada.
You were born on the same day as James Joyce. Huh?
Yes, the day that, not the same day. Yes, the same day, and I think of it more as the day the book came out, February 2nd, 1922, when Ulysses came out. And my work, I mean, I knew both Mailer and McLuhan in the early years, in the early 50s, and that's why I have him...
Who was more fun to hang with on a personal level?
Oh, Mailer. Marshall was very impersonal. The point is that
You told him not to publish The Deer Park.
Who told him not to?
Did you?
No, I wasn't part of his...
supportive of all his
I was feeding him...
ambitions?
See, you know, Harlot's Ghost is about Connie and me.
Right.
And
Connie is Kittredge and you are Hugh?
I'm Harry.
Harry.
And I fed him a lot of the information, and I was the person he interviewed to get his material to understand what it was like in the CIA. And it's actually about life in the DIA and involved with the Secret Council of 10. But Mailer, he's a populist, so he's going to talk on the level that the people can understand, the institutions they're afraid of or involved with, and that's the CIA. And it's very well done how he shows the dilemma of Hugh. And Hugh was the person I worked with for many years and then took over. So I'm really interested in how Norm's going to show the transformation of me, Harry, in relation to Hugh in the
next
part
one.
2.
Right.
And but I wasn't involved in his career as a novelist. I was the one who fed him experiences that he used as a metaphor. You know, I'm the one who told him behind-the-scenes situation.
Were you involved in the tunnel experiment?
Yes.
Into East Berlin when you were tapping into the Soviet...
Yes. I was approximately that age. I mean, Harry, when is Harry born? He's like 15, he's born in 1932, right?
He's rock climbing in 1939, right?
Yeah,
That's his test of manhood. He's rock climbing, so he's about 17 then?
Yeah, so he's born about 1930, 32. So that's just 10 years for me. So it's approximately my experience as a young person in the intelligence agencies. But I just want to point out what we have in the chart here. In the period from 1960 to 1977, the computer is the ground, the popular art form in the black and white TV phase is the Beatles, and in the color TV phase, psychedelia is the popular art form. Now the highbrow art form for that is Norman Mailer's black and white TV phase, and Marshall McLuhan comes in the psychedelic phase. Mailer, dealing within the black and white dialectic, still was within the battle between Plato and Aristotle in the Western tradition, which was the problem of the Promethean ego. Marshall, being color TV and more tactile, he was outside of that Western dialectic, and he played off the cult of the West versus the cult of the East. That's the meaning of this point. So I don't know if you noticed that, but yes, Mailer and McLuhan are key people in the chart.
In relation to Kennedy, Marshall McLuhan had, when he was reviewing the debates in the '60s, I don't know if you were actually at any of the debates, helping or behind the scenes.
No.
But Marshall said Kennedy was the good sheriff in the town that would help you and help you out and keep the town safe, and Nixon was the greedy, weaselly railroad lawyer with the 5 o'clock shadow. You know, that came across immediately. And Mailer chose to call his article for Esquire that he thought put Kennedy over the hump by about 100,000 votes by getting hipsters to vote for him. Superman comes to the supermarket. So they were both aware of TV's utilization of the pop consciousness in this election.
Yes. Oh, that's the amazing thing.
You maintain that was Kennedy's mastery of television was one of the things that contributed to his murder. Is that right?
Yep.
Or am I just...
No, that's exactly right. The on the chart I have here as the symptoms of the problem in the computer phase from 1960 to 1977. A symptom of that, a disservice or a figure of the disservice, is the JFK assassination, because TV is obsolete by 1960, so TV becomes the figure. It's no longer ground. And it's when, see, computer is LSD to the business world.
Right.
And so that's a problem for the Rockefellers and the international money media managers. And TV, with computer as the ground, then that's a problem for the money people. But they're not going to see the ground affecting them. They're going to blame the figure. And the previous ground becomes figure when a new ground surfaces. So TV becomes the figure. Now, Nixon is visual space.
Right.
Kennedy is kinetic space.
Kennedy's like a Roy Lichtenstein painting as opposed to Nixon.
No,
being
he's kinetic space, which is the main bias of American culture. He's a product of the movie radio sensibility to the max.
Seductive, pulsating dots as opposed to a static.
A male Marilyn Monroe, you know. And so the fact that he had the right resonance in his image with the tactile mosaic mesh, which becomes a figure and noticeable on the instinctual political level, not on the money management level, which is a deeper ground, that threatened the money managers. That this person, they were getting affected by television too. They were feeling the threat to their sense of power, and Kennedy acted out that power. And Kennedy was unaware of the effects, but then he started to feel it in response as his regime went on. And so then he felt more megalomaniac and felt that we could change things. That was his mistake, that he thought he could change things. And so Kennedy's image is the threat that evoked his assassination on a gut level that the people who were involved in killing him, including myself, and I wasn't a planner, but I acted out some of the levels.
That begs my next question.
Well, let me just finish.
Well, be the rest of the show.
Yeah. The thing is that everybody was threatened by this new environment, which was a computer, but they didn't see it. They only saw it in the TV image. And Marilyn Monroe herself went through a crisis in her Hollywood career because she was obsolete by the TV image. That whole drama is acted out. Now, what's really amazing, if you want to communicate, and I point this out, or it's quoted by Nelson Thal on the second CD, if you want to rub it in the face of America so that they look at this problem of Kennedy and Monroe and the assassination, for 30 years they wrote books about it. But it wasn't until Oliver Stone put it in a movie form that it communicated and changed the law. See, you have to pick the right medium for the right culture. And movies are the archetypal, instinctual, unconscious for a kinetic space America version. All right, now you wanted to say something.
This might well be the rest of the first show.
The question?
Who killed Kennedy and why?
Well, see, here's the first thing. Are you willing to protect me if I say? Because the people involved in it are still making sure it's suppressed. If we announce on this show who killed it, who killed Kennedy, you would have a hell of a life from this point on. So, since you're not aware of the ramifications of saying that, I'm not going to say it because of what will happen to you and your loved ones. And it could happen to me, though I have a command position, the Secret Council 10, since 1988.
Well, I was going to ask you to cover me, actually.
Yeah, this is a problem, because I'm controversial on so many levels that I've got many people I've got to protect, and I'm not sure, having only met you, I'm not sure if I can fit you in to protect you. And so the way to protect you is not to say it, is not to get into it.
Well, let's assume that you do say it.
Yeah, what would happen?
Let's assume that we're even holograms.
Right.
You know, and certainly as Bob, you have a mastery of metamorphosis. I mean, well, Heller used you in Catch-22.
Yes.
One of the great American novels, one of the first American novels, one of the first world novels.
The first propaganda for Club 22.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Bob was a changeling on Twin Peaks.
Oh, that was about me. And
you could. Why don't you give like a facet of the conspiracy?
Okay.
Are you telling us there was a conspiracy?
Oh, certainly was. It was a trauma. It was a Greek tragedy. The characters didn't know what was really motivating them. I think there's regret in certain people who did the assassination. They realize now, because the TV age, in simple terms, is 53 to 93. People, by the late 80s understood how they got fooled by the TV effect with the subliminal problem of computers. And once we wake up, we have remorse. It's human. We all have the spark of creative reason and goodness in us. I believe that goodness wins over evil. I don't believe in the yin-yang where good and evil constantly cancel each other out. And so therefore guilt will come to you. It's like the symbolists at the end of the 19th century. A lot of them converted to Catholicism. As they got older, that instinctual guilt comes through. And that's why the parents are right, even the pink parents, to tell the kids to cool it in their instinctual desire to be chaotic and to have fun. Because you're going to feel embarrassed about the things you did later. When you're older,
That's
at
good.
some point.
That's where country music comes from.
Right. And so, morality has a base because it's a way of giving you slack later, because the way the stages of apprehension go in a normal human being is that you get detached by the time you're 40 or 50 and you start to see what you did. And you can't stop feeling how, it's like waking up, you can't stop feeling how out of control you were and how irresponsible you were in your dreams.
So you go from the Dionysian, the wallowing in indulgence and substances,
to the Apollonian,
free you from the setup of morality, to the later Apollonian.
That's right.
That's texture of realizing what you did.
Yeah, that's the
coming to terms with it.
That's the usefulness of my book here, which is you as a poet.
Do you want to hold that up? Had a communion with Bob Dobbs.
Yeah, with the telephone coming out of the key, the dangling phone, which I put out after I was not important for me to be on the radio in Toronto anymore.
You don't just give people the dangling conversation as Paul Simon did. You give them the entire apparatus behind it.
I give them the stage of apprehension, which brings us back to this point, is that this book this book is Napoleon, which is a
Napoleon.
E-P-Y-L-L-I-O-N. It's a small epic, a little epic, like The Wasteland was. And it's a homage to The Wasteland, and it spirals past The Wasteland. It has new negentropy on a broader scale. The Wasteland is basically a collage of cultural content. This is a collage, I could say cultural forms, but a better way to say it is the archetypes of the schools of thought and perception. The archetypal schools or archetypal pathways of thought, which is inner, and perception, which is outer. And it's a mixing of the two. There's a dialectic in there, but then I try to go past the dialectic. But the stages of apprehension, which this book mimes, for the content of the global theater, which is the media themselves. This is the wasteland for the media forms themselves. Whereas the wasteland itself is the anthropomorphic content expressed through culture, and it's encyclopedic.
So the forms act themselves out as you read them.
Ah, very important. And
that was your intent?
Yes, that's the point.
Is that where language and poetry should be at this point? Is that where
I claim that that poetry today is expressionist in the sense that anything is poetry. It's like Frank's point. All is music. Anything is music. So anything is poetry. So everybody can join in. It's the great participatory mandate of the electric age. But how do we get perspective on that? And I think, the medium to get perspective in is print. So I figure, and that was the traditional role of poetry in the Gutenberg phase, not before Gutenberg. I mean, this is what Keats and them, they wanted to show the aesthetic moment, the recollection in tranquility of an important experience or moment.
The quill is in there.
Yeah. Ooh, always very good.
Always scratching the parchment.
Yes, and so there is a visual bias in the aesthetic moment mandate. But how do we, and then the symbolists who came in after Shelley and Keats, the second romantics.
Baudelaire?
Yeah, they brought in...
That crowd?
Yeah, no longer the aesthetic moment, but the dancing image as an aesthetic expression. Not the static moment, the dancing image, the dancing moment. Yeats' how can you tell the dancer from the dance? But the thing is, how I feel I've solved this problem of how to use visual space, homeopathic retrieval visual space in poetic form, so that I subsume all the poetry that's expressed up to this point as a gold standard. Not that it tells you to stop expressing yourself, because we now are democratic and it's a participatory situation where everybody can use any media. And that was the control of the Rai action before we all had access to media.
So Bob Lockdown is to encourage participatory democracy.
On the way to realizing you're going to get guilty. You know what I mean? And when you get to that guilt point and that shame point, basically literate man becomes guilty, tribal man becomes shamed. So the shame factor that's going to come to the electric tribalized people today is something that I'm offering a way out. And that's
so deep tribal remorse versus momentary
individual
bad feeling.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, my last show in Toronto, I end with that statement, the dialectic between the visually biased man and his problem of guilt, and tribal man, tribal groupings, and their problem of shame. Let's not go into it, what that is.
But the JFK assassination inspired guilt and shame both.
Well, so...
To repeat myself, what were some of the levers that were turning them?
Always repeat ourselves.
Yeah.
What were we going to say?
What was your role in the JFK assassination?
Basically, after the
Conscious, or were you moved about? Were you another Oswald
I was
Cypher
very
being
close
moved
to
on the stage?
I was very close to the people who at the highest levels organized it. But I wasn't sure what they were doing, but I was part of the meetings. I wasn't sure who was being targeted. But that was before. After the assassination, I had a definite job, and it was, as I spell out in Bob's Media Ecology Squared, the second level of media ecology is I think it's the efficient causality level, where you control information.
So you devised a series of cover stories?
Disinformation.
And, false trails to the mafia?
Yeah, false trails of information.
Carlos
I'm not agreeing
Marcello,
with that line. I'm not necessarily agreeing, but creating false trails per se in the information management. So I was a content manager, not a formal manager at that point.
You would build mosaics for people to decipher.
Right, talk to people like Norm Mailer.
So you fed him again. Not only were you feeding him in the 50s, but as he started to get increasingly interested in JFK assassination. So ultimately, after he wrote Harlot's Ghost, which is a view of the solar government that was coming in, right? It's
unconscious
it's a huge, overweening view of
view.
these very same people that you allude to.
Yeah.
I think you can feel free to name them, because he does in that book, and Fletcher Prouty has named them.
Named who? The Secret Council 10 people?
Only who they think was involved in it.
Yeah, no. See, that's the problem with Mailer is, if you look at my chart, I have 1918 to 1945, lockdown world government. 1945 to 1960 is lockdown solar government. Most people, most avant-garde thinkers, were looking at the lockdown of world government, which was a rear-view mirror action from 18 to 45. So
the Beat Generation, all that was...
They were reacting to the lockdown.
Music in the 50s was...
They were reacting to the solar government because Sputnik made the planet a theater. The global village, under world government conditions before 1945, became the global theater in 1957. And that's when Beatnik became acceptable. Okay?
So where was it pushed from, top or bottom?
The bottom up is the satellite effect. The satellite created the global theater. So the solar government was the hidden ground. But most people were just then seeing the rearview mirror image, the obsolete world government. And Mailer spends 40 years wrestling with the world government.
Right.
And he doesn't know the solar government effects. Now, Marshall, when he first appeared in the 60s, he was considered like a comet that came in from outer space. A very apt metaphor, because he understood the solar government, and he was describing the solar government, so he had the edge. He had subsumed Mailer's dilemma, understood the problem was, how do you preserve world culture in a solar theater? That was the difference.
But Mailer was useful to the whole Marshall McLuhan effect.
Oh,
he was more in the ring as the pugilist fighting, and Marshall might have been Bundini Brown in the corner saying, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee."
That's right. And then Marshall,
which is what you do. You're sort of off the main fight canvas, directing.
Up till 1990. Up till 1990, because remember in 1977 everything disappeared. All the media, software, communism disappeared.
Was that your cue to?
Yes, that's when we moved into Toronto in 77, Connie and I. I had to go to Dallas in 77 and 8 and 9, and that's when Stang and Drummond encountered me as young people.
It must have been strange for you to go back to Dallas in that year, because Mohrenschildt kills himself, a lot of your old cronies are gone.
See, there's where the cycle comes back. I mean, that's the year of the House Select Committee investigations in the assassination, 77 to 79.
Did you devise punk rock as an antidote to that?
I was the first person to perform the merging of the sports star and the culture star in the 70s when I read some content poetry while doing push-ups on the stage at CBGB's in the spring of 75. That was the beginning of the punk movement. And you'll see in Time magazine in 1970.
And hence punk took the cue to get athletic.
That's right.
You have Henry Rollins running, you have
They
Black
weren't really
Flag
anti-hippies. They weren't really anti-hippies. They were anti the visual bias of the hippies who sat still like Buddhists and emperors. The punks wanted to leap about. In other words, enhance the kinetic aspect, which
go up and down.
Right. So I was initiator of that. But see, from 77 And I was going to say that the Dallas thing would come back, and so I had to
recycled back.
No, yeah, it's going to come back because it's a major trauma. The symptoms on the chart aren't major traumas that stay in the collective unconscious for many periods of time. And I have to say it that way because the periods of time are happening simultaneously and recycling and spiraling, and it's not linearly organized, linearly organized. So in '77, when we moved into negative land, only the after image was available of software communism. From '77 to '90, that's when I begin to surface. And in '90, the after image, negative land disappears. We return to the rule of good over bad. We go into positone, to quote Mark Free, or into positive land, but there's only two people occupying it, me and Connie. And my job is to resuscitate you people who are, at best, homeopathic retrievals, and even that is a very unknowable state. So I am not operating behind the scenes since 1990. I am the only one on the stage at this point.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm America's greatest artist, but by strange coincidence,
but you're not alive.
You're America's only artist.
I'm the only one that says why he is the only artist alive today. The rest of you are virtualized, disappeared. I'm the only one who's reappeared. That's the meaning of the critical appraisal, the exegesis by Nelson Thal, which is in the first pamphlet. See, that's the point. I'm the only one
Well, the thing
alive.
is, I'm not even here. I just stick around for my friends, as Beefheart said. But you're in that same boat most of the time.
That's what I liked about
Rambo's drunken boat.
When you're ooh, Rimbo.
But you see land from there, though.
Yeah, no, here's the point, is that I liked your talk, your tribute to Don Van Vliet, which Jerry showed me. That cover, I think it was May 14th, 1970, Rolling Stone. Mm-hmm. That was an awesome cover.
Yeah.
That's a person who had perfect pitch at that time. And you're
Exactly.
right, when that came out, even me, who knew Don and worked with him a lot, I loved that cover, and I stared at it all the time. And then the article was so well done by Langdon Winter.
Yes. Well, those are the past 28 minutes, Bob.
Living past the speed
We'll
of light.
take a short break, and we'll talk again next week on many of these same subjects. With
Tom, it never
Bob
ends. It
Dobbs.
never ends talking with me.
Bob Dobbs. And well, it shouldn't. It never even ends looking at you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, I'll have a smoke.
Yeah, and I'll change my clothes.
Then you'll change your clothes, yeah.
But you see, we just big thick loaf, eh? Oh yeah, big thick loaf.
Big thick loaf.
And I forgot the ground. You know that. So was that?
Ground rules, so the figures can have
So
ammo.
did you get swallowed up? So we're inside swimming around.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, next one we might want to both take it just a completely different texture.
Yeah, yeah. We're 3022, which is 11 and 22, 22 and 11, which can become 33, or it can become 222. What an amazing product.
1 or 2, 2.